Hi, everyone. For this video, I decided to do a bit of a departure from the earlier ones we've had and discuss with you the video games that I play, particularly in the sports genre, and give you some insights on how I play and sites that I use to help mod those games to get the particular simulation aspect that I like to make it as realistic as possible in each case. So I hope you enjoy this, and I hope it leads to a good discussion in the comment section regarding the games that you like to play, how you play them, and what you hope to see in sports gaming in the future. This is a very interesting time because of the development of Steam in particular for those who want to see alternatives to a lot of the strong titles that we've historically had in the sports genre, particularly from EA Sports. And there's, I think, a growing sentiment that many people want to see more realistic gameplay and features that give users more choice in terms of the types of gaming experiences that they have. So I hope that you enjoy this. I wrote down a list that you can see on your screen, and this will help me talk about each game, and in particular, give me a good sense of where I want to go with this, because there's a lot of detail to cover. But I think it's good to have this discussion because many fans of different sports also play video games. And with the advent of sports betting, just the amount of interaction that people have with applications, both in a play and gambling context, I think it's important that we look at this together. So, first of all, just a brief explanation in terms of how I run my computers. I use Windows and Linux. Both platforms I've used extensively for years. I like both of them. And in order to play the games that I use, primarily I've had to adapt my Linux installations to run Windows games. So let's begin with Madden 2004 on the PC. This is the one famously with Michael Vick on the cover before his controversial dogfighting conviction. That game is considered a classic because the Michael Vick avatar, the player in the game, was revolutionary in terms of using the scrambling ability of a quarterback to completely change how the game was played. And it's had an impact on I would argue, not just on video games, but also on the entire way the game is perceived by many in terms of how the actual game is played and the types of quarterbacks that we expect to not only star, but to dominate in professional football, particularly in the NFL. Michael Vick was a pioneer in that respect, along with, you could argue, Randall Cunningham, and even going way back, Fran Tarkenton as a scrambling quarterback. So let's look at Madden 2004. Madden 2004, in fact, came out in 2003. And back in the day, I had a Windows XP computer, 32-bit, slow as molasses, 46 computer, as I recall. And I've played Madden 2004 extensively, probably the most of any sports game on the computer. Over the years, I developed my own teams, particularly one that I made for my hometown team, Hamilton, that I edited and researched myself. And so that was really important in terms of getting my feet wet in gaming. I am not a joystick warrior, so I'm not someone who likes to play head to head against players online, or in terms of playing even the computer. But what I do is I like to play coach mode in Madden games. And this is no different with 2004. So there's a setting in Madden 2004 and in many Madden versions subsequent to that, where you can, in fact, have a coach mode where you simply call the plays. And you can, of course, audible using your gamepad and be able to audibilize at the line of scrimmage, both on offense and defense, according to what you see happening on the field pre-snap from your opponent. So primarily, I play single player in all my sports games. But with Madden in particular, I use the all-pro setting because I think it's the most realistic, and that gets into discussion on simulating football and trying to get the most accurate comparative statistics to actual football that we see on the field today. And even back then, of course, when the game came out. So with Madden 2004, what you'll find as I discuss this is that there's particular settings that I'll get into that particularly simulate this game and others to be more accurate than what the default settings are. So let's take a look at 2004, just in terms of the kinds of settings. First of all, you'll find that in most Madden games, whether they be on the PC or on the PS2, which I'm familiar with, but all consoles, that there are many adaptations, they're called mods, that different websites host. Players share their findings in terms of settings that maximize their gameplay. And I'm no exception to that. So in the case of 2004, over the years, I stumbled upon various mods. One in particular was from a user called Red Wolf on the Football Freaks site, which no longer exists. I'm going to be talking about the sequel to that website a little bit later. But Red Wolf in particular, his settings in Madden are outstanding. And in many cases, I've adapted those to whatever platform I'm using, whatever version I'm using. But the key is you'll find on PC games that quite often the best settings for playing against the computer, the AI, or playing head to head. Many users play with 12-minute quarters, not 15. If you're looking for statistical accuracy, namely the number of plays per team per game, I think, although I could be wrong with the more modern Maddens, those after Madden 2019 on the PC. But historically, I've been exposed to different versions, and 12-minute quarters tend to yield the best results because of the number of plays per player, particularly the way the computer AI calls the game. So Red Wolf developed a whole series of sliders, which you can adjust in the Madden games, that affect the performance of the computer as opposed to the human player. And so a lot of it's trial and error. And you find on the historically the Football Freak site and the one that has replaced it, which is known as footballidiot.com, great name, that you can actually really have a granular, particularly old games, a granular control over how the game is played, at least on the statistical side. So 12-minute quarters. I use an accelerated clock because I'm not the type of person that will sit through the actual 40-second clock in the older games. I like to have the accelerated clock, which is 20 seconds per play. It kind of gets you in the CFL mindset that you have to make your calls relatively quickly, and you adjust accordingly very quickly. And so that really gives it an urgency. And also it allows for the game with the 12-minute quarters. You can quite often get a game against the computer to end within an hour, which is really good. And it's something that I enjoy in terms of the actual game time that I like to put into it. So Madden 2004 is for many the most free-flowing. It was extremely weighted towards the offense. And you see that with the Michael Vick player in the game. But it just in general, the offenses tended to have advantages with the playmaker controls, the ability to change the way the running game is run either on the left side or the right side of the scrimmage based on the shifts that you can make, both in terms of motion pre-snap as well as just simply the way the play is designed. So that was an advantage that the offense had in particular. Madden 2005, which I'll get into later with the PS2, really equalized the advantages that the offense had with Madden 2004. The second computer game that I've really enjoyed and played to this day is Madden 2008. Now, this is where Football Idiot comes into focus with that website. footballidiot.com is run by many users who were fixtures on the former Football Freaks website. And it's visually stunning on the PC. Even today, years after its release, it's still a great looking game. And I've been able to upgrade my hardware in recent years. And so I get to enjoy it in the max settings possible based on based on the passage of time. But still, Madden 2008 is a great game visually. Where I think it falters in comparison to Madden 2004, and in particular, as I'll explain later with Madden 2005 on the PS2, is Madden 2008 has a lot of big plays in the game. A lot of big plays. It's just completely pass happy, in particular with controls by the, or lack of control, I should say, with the computer AI. The defensive backs are not very good on deep passes in comparison to other versions of the game. I think that's a fair comment to make. But the level of granular detail and control in terms of how the game is modded, it's very special. There is a set of scripts developed by a user, Calhoop, that really should be celebrated in terms of not just the history of Madden games, but the history of all sports games. His dedication in making mods to Madden games, particularly 2008, should really be commended, because he was able to create scripts that incorporate rule changes even to this day that make the game up to date in terms of actual rules, and just gives a user experience that's unique in terms of even the way the game has different camera shots, the nature of instant replay in the game, just you name it, tremendous attention to detail on how one experiences gameplay. And Calhoop is a tremendous pioneer in that respect. I've taken the Red Wolf settings that I talked about in Madden 2004. I've incorporated some of the adaptations that I've also seen on the website. And really, you can't go wrong in terms of the amount of detail. In both 2004 and 2008 Maddens, I love playing historical simulations in coach mode. So I like playing the computer or even just watching simulations using the particular settings that I've just talked about. But in particular, I'd like to give a shout out to one of the great users in the history of Madden games that I've come across, Muscle Mike, in terms of his rosters in Madden 2004. And really the updates that we've seen from his stuff in Football Idiot. Just, many different users who have created rosters and just season rosters and classic team mods that are special. Guam Yankee Also, there's a mod that he did of greatest historical teams, 1.5, that I use, and it has over 100 classic teams. So it gives you a real opportunity to play your favorite teams of the past against each other in simulation football. So that's amazing for me, and I really think that people should look into that. In particular, when playing Windows games on Linux, I use a software called Crossover Linux. The version I use right now is 20.4. It's an older version, but came out a couple of years ago. And it allows me to run Windows games on Linux with a few adaptations. But in general, the software is great because it actually gives you the opportunity to use DirectX controls, and you don't even see a major difference in terms of how the game actually unfolds on your screen. So it's a great opportunity for those of us that like to use Linux to enjoy older Windows PC titles, and in this case, in terms of football. And so I really recommend that for people that use Ubuntu or Linux Mint, Manjaro Linux, the many different varieties of Linux that are available. Crossover will run on all of them. So it's an excellent software. So in terms of PC football, those are the games that I really follow, play to this day. I am not a big fan of the modern Madden games for gameplay or authenticity, the ability to simulate games with reasonable accuracy. I don't see much benefit in terms of running simulation football on modern Madden titles. I know other players have, even participated in leagues and modded the game. And I'm sure that they've been able to find more success than I have. But in the exposure that I've had, I got betas of those games, and I quite often in the past I've simply uninstalled them because I couldn't get the game to run in a authentic way. And as a coach mode player, it's really important to have realistic or more realistic computer AI play. The biggest problem in modern games of Madden has been the defensive zone coverage. It's just absolutely pathetic. The ability of the AI to cheat in particular contexts. There's a form of cheating adaptation. I forget what the actual terminology is, but basically, if you're playing a game online, there's a way of going by one's webcam in terms of your emotional responses, that the software will adapt the gameplay to maximize one's enjoyment. And what I'll do is I'll write down the actual name of that terminology. It just escapes my mind right now. But this is an example of where the game itself doesn't give you the real ability to have an experience that is consistent, that resembles football. These are games. You're going to have glitches. You're going to have unexpected results from time to time. But when you can't play a quarter of football in a video game without having something happen that is completely bass backwards, it's really it's really sad. So, as someone who doesn't need the most up to date Madden to enjoy the game, someone who doesn't play online, and someone who doesn't need all the bells and whistles in terms of the graphics, fidelity, and so on. These are the games I play: Madden 2004, Madden 2008 on the PC. And I'd like to hear from you in terms of your experiences with the modern games, if you play them. I might be wrong. And, in terms of your experiences, to each their own, as far as I'm concerned. So, I accept that people still enjoy them, but many don't. And, there are many websites and many YouTube channels that I watch that express frustration with current Madden games. So let's move on to Steam. Of course, Steam is the website that's run by Valve, which is arguably the leader in PC game distribution. And I use it both on Windows and on Linux for the games that I play that are more current than the Madden ones I've just talked about. On Steam, like with Madden, my games are single player. I don't play online against people. But I do, again, like games that I can play historical simulations between great teams. And I'll get to the franchise hockey manager, where in fact there are historical games that you can play with really bad teams, and just the fun in terms of changing the history of a team by being the general manager or the coach. That interests me. For baseball, out of the park baseball, I've played out of the park baseball 2017 and 2021. And now I currently play the 2022 version. I like playing as the Montreal Expos, whether I started a franchise in 1970 in Jerry Park, or in the absolute heyday of the Montreal Expos in the late 1970s. The Gary Carter, Andre Dawson, Tim Raines, Steve Rogers era. So playing with the Expos or playing with the Toronto Blue Jays teams that I grew up watching a lot growing up in Ontario, or other simulations of famous teams. Out of the park baseball is phenomenal, particularly if you like to manage, either as a general manager or a manager in the dugout, being able to structure your teams, the in-game strategy. It's fantastic. It's somewhat reminiscent of Earl Weaver baseball. If you remember back in the day of Commodore 64 or the Atari or other versions of the game where you actually had really simplistic graphics, but it was tremendous in terms of the statistical fidelity to the players and their histories. So I really like out of the park baseball for that. The 3D models of the game in terms of the ballparks and how the players move on the field are much better than they were back in 2017. It was, just basically watching stickmen running around, fielding the ball and running the base paths. But now it's more in line with what you would expect in terms of simulations, even of the past. MLB The Show, I've played versions of the game and others of that ilk on the PS2. And they're great, but in terms of statistical fidelity, as I say, I really like the out of the park baseball series. Franchise Hockey Manager 8. I've played, I believe it was Manager 5, Franchise Hockey Manager 5, the last one, which was 7, and the current one, which is 8. Those are the 3 I've played. And I have to say, although the 3D play is really not there, it's still basically a 2D gameplay. The ability to put your teams together and to simulate seasons, including the historical seasons, makes it very interesting in terms of drafting players, just altering the fortunes of teams, whether they be great teams that didn't win a Stanley Cup or even non-contending teams. So those are games that I like to play in terms of hockey. And also, I have an old version of Football Manager, which run on an old Linux system of mine. That's the Football Manager Touch game, came out in 2016. I've also run the beta of Football Manager 2021, and it runs well as well. So it's really interesting. I like soccer. I'm not as big an aficionado in terms of strategy as I am particularly of football, but it's a good game as well. So I really like that on Steam. Steam is important because of the development of a game, for lack of a better word, emulation layer called Proton, which acts similar to what I was talking about with Crossover Linux on the actual PC, with Wine as a layer, which converts Windows software calls, in particular applications and games, to ones that are understood by Linux systems. So you have that in Steam with Proton. And it's made a huge difference in terms of the number of games that you can play with Linux. In the past, you were limited to what you could do with Windows games. A lot of Windows games would break. But now with Proton, you're able to use a compatibility layer. That's a better term than emulator, but a compatibility layer, which allows you to play Windows games in Linux with results that are almost native in terms of seeing very little to no difference, depending on the game, between the two platforms. So, if you're someone who's interested in playing games on Linux, this is a great time to be alive in terms of software. So those are the two big aspects in terms of computers, both the actual games that I have to install with actual discs, the Madden ones that I use, and also the ones that I've installed via Steam. Finally, I have an old PS2, and I've had 3 PS2s over my life. And this third one's lasted me a long time, like close to 6 years. And the game that I really enjoy playing on that platform is Madden 2005. Madden 2005 was really an antidote to what I talked about earlier with Madden 2004. In Madden 2004, offense is dominated. And the Michael Vick player in the game completely dominated defenses, the ability to scramble at will. the offenses had a big advantage in that game, especially if you're just simply playing against the computer AI. But with Madden 2005, the ability to control the game on defense, if you were playing against another user or even playing online, it completely equalized the game. And in terms of scoring, it's much more difficult to, in my experience, even someone who plays it exclusively in coach mode now, to score on the computer. It's much more difficult. And again, it was a really good fine tuning. And Operation Sports is one website where you can get a lot of different mods and settings that players have shared that really help your experiences with those games. Madden 2005, another example of that. As well, there's the ESPN 2K5 game, which I think is the most visually stunning game, the most innovative game I've ever seen, that I've played just to any great extent. And that game, I just feel, is a little bit lower in terms of actual gameplay when you're playing against the computer, as much as I do, simply because the number of interceptions in the game. The slider settings in the game don't have as much impact on a fine granular level as you will see with the PC versions of games, as I explained earlier with Madden 2004 and Madden 2008. But in terms of the halftime presentation, pre-game commentary, the visuals of the stadiums, it's just incredible, the ability of ESPN NFL 2K5 to simulate television coverage by ESPN in a video game. And I think that Madden, since that time, has scratched the surface in terms of what you saw in that particular title, not just on the PS2, but even in subsequent iterations with emulators that you can see online today. But again, Madden 2005 is tremendous. In that game, I play against the computer with 10-minute quarters. Again, it's just a good way of keeping the number of plays per player to what is a better simulation of actual conditions in 2004 when the game came out. As well, if you're simulating the game, it's always good to have the teams play 8-minute quarters if you're talking about the historical teams. Now, I've edited a lot of the historical teams in Madden 2005 on the PC, I'm sorry, the PS2. And that's an art form in itself, just to get all that information online. ProFootballReference.com is my go-to in terms of getting the statistical breakdown of not only the players, but also the ratings. Any ratings adjustments that I make are based on statistics that I use from that website. So these are some of my thoughts in terms of computer gameplay and gameplay on console, particularly with the PS2. I'd like to hear from you. What are your experiences in terms of sports video games? And what kind of innovations would you like to see? What excites you about the current landscape of sports video gaming? And what needs to be improved in the different sports? So thank you for your time. if you liked what you saw today, please hit like and subscribe. And I hope to hear from you again soon. And I'll have more coverage on games. I'm considering investing in a capture card and actually simulating some games to share with you some experiences that I've had. But in the links below, I'm going to put links to the different websites that I've talked about and a shout out to particular users that have really helped me in my journey in sports video games. So again, thanks for your time, and we'll talk again soon.